Hello all. In this video, I'll quickly go over how I got rid of a P2111 and P2135 error on a 2011 Ford Focus. This is apparently a very common issue, which affects Fords of this generation. I'm not a Ford guy, but from what I was reading, it's a very common issue, which usually results in having to change the throttle body. Um, I decided to take mine apart to have a look to see if I could fix anything. I unfortunately didn't have a video camera, so I've just got a couple of pictures and I'll go over the procedure. I believe I fixed the error. The car is operating normally now. Symptoms which would usually cause or be linked to this code, I guess, is the car will get stuck in limp mode. You'll get a wrench icon showing up, check engine light. You pull the code, it will register something with voltage AB correlation on the throttle pedal and something with the throttle position angle being wrong. This usually manifests itself at low speed, at idle. Apparently, it is linked to a Hall effect sensor within the throttle body, which measures the opening angle of the throttle body valve. Um, and apparently they go bad. Luckily, they're fairly easy to open, and you can actually I think, fix the issue. So here's the throttle body out of the car. There's bolts on it because when I was taking it apart, I broke every one of the torque screws. Quick tip, if you want to get these out, I would suggest you try to heat the metal if you can without melting the plastic, or if you've got no heads left on your bolts like I did, I took a hacksaw, cut some grooves at the top, and I used a flathead screwdriver. Luckily, there's anti-seize on them, and they came out pretty easily. Unfortunately, they were unusable. Luckily, I believe it's metric 4 screws that go back in there. So the throttle body itself is in a vise right now. What you're seeing is the actual Hall effect sensor on the side, which measures the opening of the throttle plate. I had opened up the entire thing to see if the motor was okay because there's gearing in there, and it was making a weird noise, so I thought the gears were stripped, but apparently it's fine. So what I did then is I concentrated on the Hall sensor itself. It's in this part, so it's this little bump that sticks out. And you can actually see it's got this plate that seems like you can pry it out, and you can actually pry it out with screwdrivers. And once you pry it out, you'll see a little circuit board. Here's a circuit board out of the sensor body. Now, it wouldn't be out of it normally. What you're seeing is the underside of it. Usually what you would see is a backing. There'll be 4 soldering joints. They'll be marked ground, TPS, VCC, and something else. To remove the board itself will require some soldering wick. So this is a copper braid with a lot of flux, and if you heat up the soldering joint with the wick over it, it'll absorb the solder and basically remove it from the joints. You can then pry the board out. Do this carefully. The board is also held in with the equivalent of like 4 little plastic rivets on the body. What I did is I sort of ripped the heads off those, and then I just glued it back in with super glue at the end. And here's where the issue appears. This is what you will originally see when you open up the throttle position sensor. You'll see four soldering joints. You're seeing goop on there because that was flux. I was trying to reheat the joints to see if they were okay. But at the bottom, you'll see that the trace itself seems to have been oxidized. It's not the exact same color as the rest of the board. It's sort of this darkish green. And so I was curious about that. So what I did is I used soldering wick and I removed all the solder on these. And I took the board out, and this is what it looks like on the underside. The chip is the Hall sensor, and that picks up the throttle angle. You've got a whole bunch of capacitors and stuff like that. It's covered in varnish, but it appears like corrosion set in, and I can only assume was intermittently shorting out the 2 pads on the bottom right. And so all I did was I cleaned this off. What you can usually do to get this clean is use flux and a little bit of solder. You heat up the soldering pads, and the flux will oxidize. The acid will take away all the oxidation. Then I cleaned it off with brake cleaner to make sure it was all nice and clean. Here's the actual joints under the microscope, so you can see something really got in there. I can only assume it was shorting out the 2 pads. One of those is the ground, the one closest to the middle of the screen is the ground. It is hard to take this board out. The ground pad is connected to a lot of copper, so it takes a lot of heat to melt the solder. Be careful not to overheat the board when you do this, obviously. But then all I did was, after cleaning this off, I soldered everything back up. I sealed the throttle position sensor here with some silicone. put the car back together and it is operating normally. So hopefully this can help you. As far as I can tell, it's going to avoid me having to buy new throttle body.